You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Welcome, Star Wars fans.
I'm Alex,
I'm Connor.
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars.
As we do from time to time, and today we're going to move on to Star Wars Alien Species, which we started, but we found that we just didn't have enough time to dig into all of the alien species out there. Plus, we forgot a lot.
Yes, and specifically for those who haven't listened to our previous episode, episode 34, this is looking at the sentient races of Star Wars. There are many alien creatures that sort of fulfill the role of animals, such as Rancors and Nexu, but we're looking at those that alien species and races that have their own society, customs, appearances, and sort of how they fit in the Star Wars universe. Why do we think that they decided to have this unique alien race, aside from looking cool, which is just fine by itself? Prominent members of that species that we can call back to, and just what narrative space that they're occupying with their unique characteristics.
So let's start with everyone's favorite alien species, the
Uh,
Gungans.
yes, the Gungans, natives of Naboo, one of the two native species of Naboo, along with the humans who live in the Theed and its environs. They are semi-aquatic, so amphibious, can breathe underwater for long periods of time. Technologically advanced, particularly with water control technology and warlike. They have long ears down their back. They have a distinctive way of speaking Basic because they have their own language. And yeah, they have again a tribal warlike society that nonetheless has rather advanced technology.
Featured prominently in The Phantom Menace, The Clone Wars. That's about it as far as our appearances into visual Gungan media.
Yeah, they are perhaps unfortunately most represented by.
Boss Nass, the most memorable Gungan there ever is.
I was going to say Jar Jar Binks.
I know.
Yeah,
Everyone knew.
yeah. So, and Jar Jar Binks is not a typical Gungan in the fact that he is a fool.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that in the classical sense of he is fulfilling the narrative role of the fool.
And in the modern sense that he is a foolish man.
He is also a foolish man, yes. So, uh, Jar Jar Binks, companion to Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then later representative of Naboo, assisting in the retinue of Senator Amidala. So, Jar Jar is loyal and friendly, but is also a buffoon.
Yes. He's not representative of the entire Gungan race, who is, by and large, much more serious than he is. I know there's a Gungan commander or general who uh, cuts a better swash of Gungan culture in a few lines than Jar Jar does in just his walk cycle.
Yeah, Captain Tarples. So Gungans is Jar Jar has been exiled from Gungan society because he doesn't fit in because he's a buffoon.
Mhm.
But from we see of other Gungans, they are have a powerful military and a powerful warrior tradition. They utilize a technology that appears to be largely like barrier and bubble based, where they can both have underwater cities that keep the water out at extreme depths. They have submersibles that can traverse the cores of planets, though Naboo is a very unique geological planet, and they have weaponry that uses ion explosions to oppose the droid armies of the Trade Federation. They even are managed to, in the Clone Wars, a Gungan force is able to subdue General Grievous. Taking some losses, but do so rather effectively.
So I agree. It's a very much a visually striking, interesting culture. I can definitely see why we didn't view any more of it, just because of the fan backlash to Jar Jar Binks back then. But still, an interesting analog to what a more tribal race could be without being your stereotypical. We just use spears and knives. They have their own technology and their own tactics that make for a visually interesting battle at the end of Phantom Menace.
Yeah, and there's certainly between the Gungans and the Nabooians, they are two people occupying the same planet with very different traditions that distrust each other, and the ability of Queen Amidala and Boss Nass to come together and form an alliance of mutual understanding, despite their cultural differences, is portrayed as a positive thing.
Anything else about the Gungans?
No, as far as seeing Gungans in the future, I'd be down with it. Not all Gungans display the, I would say, verbal challenges that other Gungans we see. There's in fact a passage in one of the Aftermath novels where there's a Gungan tech who needs to hack into something, and someone attempts to greet him in traditional Gungan accent. He's super offended. He's like, "I was educated at university. Why are you treating me like a backwoods yokel?" Um, just Misa this and Misa that. So definitely, there's a self-aware element of Star
Yeah.
Wars where the Gungans themselves don't want to be stereotyped into the Jar Jar Binks role.
If we get a Gungan in the future, should they be CGI or practical?
It'd be hard to do a practical Gungan with it, given the way
And the
yeah,
proportions
the
work?
proportions of their
Yeah.
faces and their so probably a CGI character,
Hmm.
which is why we see more of them in animation,
Hmm.
because Jar Jar Binks being a 80% CGI character definitely made him more expensive to have on screen
Oh, yes.
and expensive to my sanity to try to justify his existence in the narrative.
So, without further ado, moving on to our next alien species, the Kaminoans from the
Yeah.
planet Kamino.
As we'll notice with many of these alien species, some of them, like humans, live on many planets. Others are native to one planet and they stay there. They view
Hmm.
humans as really weird for always wanting to go to different planets. It's like
Yeah.
there's this one planet that's perfectly suited. It's where you evolved. Why don't you stay there?
Hmm.
So Kaminoans are in the same boat as the Gungans. So the planet of Kamino is covered by water. The Kaminoans, appear to be some kind of originally a nomadic people that on the few bits of dry land, being somewhat amphibious and taming animals to survive on the planet. But they have, at the point of our Star Wars story, become renowned cloners and users of very advanced technology with a series of floating cities that dot the surface of Kamino.
Another visually striking planet. I love, love, love to battle on it in Star Wars Battlefront 2, the original version. Being able to traverse the different sort of pods within the sea landscape. The seascape? The seascape was just visually interesting. Uh, but again, it's another, you know, single environment planet where everything is just wet and raining all the time. Uh, and the Kaminoans themselves have a very strong uh, business export in the form of clones.
Yeah, so it's implied that there are Kaminoans who are not involved in their national industry, which is cloning. Kaminoans themselves are depicted as being pale skinned, very long necks, so being like 8 feet tall with relatively small heads. Uh,
Q-tips.
yeah, and also long, willowy limbs, being relatively thin, speaking in a very deliberate and measured style with very large eyes. And furthermore, they probably see more into the ultraviolet spectrum than humans because all of their um, technology and flights appear to be very white. So there is a larger spectrum of visual light available to the Kaminoans.
And that doesn't help them recognize faces because they just spill their guts to Obi-Wan Kenobi because he's a Jedi and oh, a Jedi ordered all of these Jango Fett clones. Let's just tell this stranger all about our operation.
Yeah, and so Kaminoans, I think, are a relatively sparse people, and the only people that interact with the galactic society as a whole are the Kaminoans. In fact, they are renowned for their cloning technology, and they get more infamous post the Clone Wars. And so, for a brief period, they are not. They're more secretive before that, but they have been thrust into the limelight, and they get a great deal of money and resources from the Republic to continue to make clones to fulfill the needs of the Clone Wars war effort,
Mhm.
which then eventually backfires when they are no longer needed by the Empire, and we see the subjugation of Kamino by the Empire in the Bad Batch,
Mhm.
which also results in the forcible relocation and perhaps genocide of the Kaminoan people.
Bummer.
Yeah, it's not. It's one of the more visually distinct moments from the Bad Batch, but is also one of the saddest and one of the early indicators that how far the Empire is willing to go to maintain their secrets. So it's the Kaminoans, as we see with many of these cultures. One way of making them distinct, not just visually, physically, but is also to make their technology uh, different than sort of the Republic standard. And the Kaminoans are no exception. They have their cloning tubes, their bright white coloration, and their floating cities above their ocean planet.
Mhm.
And in that same vein, we come to our next species to talk about the Umbarans, who are most famously depicted in the Clone Wars arc set on Umbara, uh, where General Pong Krell turns out to have fallen to the dark side. But it is this grueling trench warfare on this separatist planet, and the Umbarans themselves have very advanced technology and powerful personal electromagnetic abilities.
Mhm.
They're sort of this almost operating very alien-like in that they are hard to communicate with, they are violent, and they are powerful.
Mhm. And even on the planet, the Jedi can't use their normal technology because of that interference, as far as I remember. So they have to actually use Umbaran projectors in order to send messages back and forth. And the holograms are much blockier. It's not just like a standard cast of someone. It is like a pixelated, a 3D pixelation, if you can imagine. Go watch the episode.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
we even see some clone troopers attempting to use Umbaran technology. The Umbarans themselves are pale skinned with large heads, um, with personal great deal of personal dexterity. Um, so they're in the sort of definitely in the near human camp,
Mhm.
sort of like Twi'leks or Togruta, where they look mostly human but with a few different traits, and they're mostly distinctive culturally and in the environment they grew up in. They can see in low light conditions. They can move quietly on a planet ruled by large predators, uh, and again, their technology is unique. What else would you say about Umbarans, Connor?
And it's an interesting kind of comparison to Kaminoans, where Kaminoans are so bright, their technology is bringing such lightness to their culture, where the planet is so dark. Where Umbarans live on a dark planet, and they've kind of taken that in stride in making their technology gothic and strange.
Yes, Gothic Umbarans, Gothic, strange, separatist, and cool,
Mhm.
sort of their whole aesthetic. And again, they're it's definitely being viewed through the lens of warfare, where you see their technology first and only their physical bodies second.
Mhm.
It's almost like seeing German planes go overhead in a World War II movie. You don't see the pilots; you can only imagine what they look like, but we see what
Mhm.
their technology looks like, and their technology is frightening.
So yeah, I would love to see more, especially depicted in live action at some point.
Yeah, we don't really have any notable specific Umbarans that come to mind.
Mhm.
Unlike Kaminoans, where we get Nala Se, the head cloner, and things like that. No, no specific Umbarans get the spotlight. There's no Umbaran general to negotiate with. They're simply almost a faceless enemy,
Mhm.
deliberately othered for the source of telling a entrenched war story.
Mhm. So moving on to a more visually prominent species, one that has like a great prominent character, would be the Togrutas.
So Togruta are similar to Twi'leks. The most notable Togruta is Ahsoka Tano, with the montrails that come down the front of her head, the sort of almost horn-like protrusions at the top of her head, orange and white coloration. And we get a bigger view into Togrutan culture recently when we saw the village that Ahsoka was born into in Tales of the Jedi, with their coming of age um, and roles, how women are largely the hunters. Though this is just a particular village, so we
Mhm.
don't know if that applies to the people as a whole. Um, but yes, they have a strong connection to nature and sort of live in this in a more pastoral lifestyle.
Mhm. Again, kind of tribal. It's not a high technology society.
Yeah, but they still have blasters and
Mhm.
communication with the greater galaxy and understanding of what the Force is. So yeah, Togrutans appear to be fairly prominent or at least populous because we see
Mhm.
many Togruta outside of their home planet. Unlike you don't see a Kaminoan just in a
Mhm.
bar in a cantina on Coruscant.
On the Jedi Council.
Yeah. So
We have Shock T, who is the prominent live action Jedi who's been killed in more ways than any other Jedi, I feel, just because in so many different canonical and non canonical references, she either survives Order 66 or is stabbed in a number of different ways, either by General Grievous or by Anakin or by Palpatine. She was a popular victim when George Lucas was trying to figure out Order 66.
yeah,
Culturally, though, how do we see much reflection of their culture in their actions in the greater Star Wars world?
no, we just get little hints of it. How Ahsoka wears a beaded band on her head instead of hair because she doesn't have hair when she's a Padawan. How she has a strong sense of both competition and family, though that could also just be Ahsoka herself.
Mhm.
Ahsoka is not particularly noted as she was raised as a Jedi. She doesn't have any particular attachment to the Togruta people as a whole.
Mhm.
In fact, the only two prominent Togruta we see are Jedi,
Mhm.
who have detached themselves from their home society. So I would love to see more about the Togruta, like more about the Twi'leks. Like Twi'leks, we know they live in Ryloth, and they have this proud culture of independence and not wanting to further be exploited. I'd
Mhm.
love to know more about the Togruta, other than the little glimpse we see of their life in the first episode of Tales of the Jedi.
Yeah, and we'll see if we get any more of that with Ahsoka's show coming out soon, hopefully. Uh, so moving on to the Sullustans. Uh, this, you said, was Lando's co-pilot, correct?
Yeah.
Nub?
Yeah, Nian Nub is the most prominent Sullustan, if you're aware of them. So, portrayed was black eyes, overlapping skin folds on the face, and speaking Huttese or Sullustese primarily in the series. We get more of their culture in the novel Twilight Company, which is a Star Wars Battlefront tie-in. How their planet is largely a volcanic desert, and they live deep underground. The Rebel Alliance often had bases there, or contacts there, and then the Empire attacked them. So we know that they have a strong. Due to the reason their eyes are so are black and the size that they are is they live underground and subsist off of
Hmm.
limited light. They have a strong mining culture. Um, but we don't see a lot of their society outside of that because their planet is so home planet is so resource rich that they are firmly conquered by the Empire in the early days of the Empire.
This is another instance of is Star Wars racist? Just because in our previous Aliens episode we kind of point to some more stereotypical representations. This, from what I've seen, has been a depiction of the non-English speaking foreign, like, friend, um, which I think is a bit of a stretch. I think there are much clearer racial connections, unfortunately, in Star Wars. We didn't talk about the Gungans, but Jar Jar Binks's just moves and talks kind of like a minstrel, which is not exactly kosher. But back in 1983, people were upset about the racial implications of Nien Nub for some reason.
No, and I can see the reading you could code an anti-Asian or anti, like Eastern European even
This is
coding into
anyone who's not white
yeah, basically
English. Yeah.
a conform to our society, please. So Nien
Hmm.
Nub in the greater expanded universe has sort of been reclaimed as a character, and the Sullustans themselves. You can play as a Sullustan character in Battlefront 2. You can be spawned in as a trooper of that species. So certainly reclaiming that race and culture, though I can see, the answer to has Star Wars been racist, Connor, is yes. It
Hmm.
absolutely has. It's been a cultural touchstone for 50 plus years, and attitudes have changed, and even then have lagged behind what the acceptable window.
Hmm.
Not that it should have, not that merely being acceptable should ever be the goal. But I personally, going back to Sullustans themselves, I think they look cool and that they're like very obviously alien,
Hmm.
um, and they have their own language, which is always fun. It's like okay, you can't just see them speaking basic. You have to actually realize that they're speaking a different language, and making the choice to not translate any of Nien Nub's dialogue was
Hmm.
interesting because even in other, especially starting in the prequel trilogy, you'd get translations
Hmm.
of other languages that weren't basic, such as Huttese. You don't get subtitles for Jabba the Hutt because C-3PO translates for
Hmm.
him, but you start getting subtitles for other alien
Hmm.
speech. You don't get that for Nien Nub. Lando Calrissian speaks Sullustan, and so he doesn't feel the need to translate for his friend as they co-pilot the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah, it's like an analog to Chewbacca, who doesn't speak basic, but he's still understood by his team.
Yeah, and again, they're a near human race, and they're bipedal, individualistic. They have their own home planet. They might have different eyes and different skin on their face, but they have four limbs,
Hmm.
and one of them banters with Lando as they blow up the second Death Star.
Hmm.
A fact which Nien Nub and Lando never let anyone forget that they're the ones who blew up the second Death Star. Thank you very much.
Very true. So, taking a look at our next race, which again is very alien coded, so much so that they're full CGI. They don't speak basic.
Yeah,
They're not,
The
yeah,
Geonosians.
not humanoid, really, other than having four limbs.
Yeah, so natives of the planet of Geonosis, these are an insect people with hive queens and and not necessarily even a hive mind, but definitely a hive mentality.
Mhm.
Individual life is cheap. The life of the rulers, whether they're male or female, are the most significant. And we get much more about Geonosians, during the Clone Wars when we see that they are the first people who came up with designs for parts of the Death Star.
And their technology itself is reminiscent of the Death Star. It's very orb-like. A lot of their gunners have this orb shape with legs and then cannons. So it's almost like a primordial Death Star. A lot of their ships, too, from what I can recollect, have that sort of orb focus with shit to build off from it.
Yeah, they use a very distinct visual sound or auditory sound for their
Hmm.
technology, which I
Yeah,
think was a deliberate choice. Yeah, but
yeah, more of a wave than a blast, really.
yeah, so we get lots more about Geonosians in the Darth Vader comic, novel Catalyst about Orson Krennic using Geonosian labor to start to build the Death Star, and then in the Rebels TV show where a surviving Geonosian is attempting to keep a final egg for a queen alive after the genocide of the Geonosians by the Empire, because the Empire loved nothing more than genocide.
Mhm.
So yeah, Geonosians, the B1 battle droids from the Clone Wars are modeled after Geonosians because Geonosians were the first people to make them. Because they were just because they're an insectoid race where life is cheap does not mean they don't have powerful technology.
Mhm.
Um, so they have the long faces, the green skin, the wings they can fly around on. So not all of them have wings, but many have wings. Uh, but yeah, as far as their culture, though, it's interesting to see how, in the novel Catalyst, Orson Krennic talks about, trying to stop fights between various factions of Geonosians because they'll just slaughter hundreds of each other. Um, which he is, anthropomorphizes them as that's being, well, he doesn't really particularly care that they're dead, but he's like, I needed more bodies for my labor.
Mhm.
But for an insect race, that was more about disagreements between two of the, you know, more like foreman overseers, and so he has to call in um, their king or their leader, Poggle the Lesser, to convince him to stop these factions from fighting. Um, but we know after the completion of the Death Star, as revealed in the Rebel show, the Empire decided that the Geonosians who could build such technology and knew about the Death Star were too dangerous to be left alive, and so they released a chemical weapon on Geonosis, um, killing and sterilizing most of the population.
Which is why we
Um,
don't see him after the Bad Batch. Which I appreciate. Or I don't appreciate genocide. I want to put that out there, but I do appreciate when universes come up with in-universe lore as to why certain things in prequels don't show up again in the original series, whether that be your Hobbits or your Star Wars here. So nice of them to add that touch, but again, sorry for the genocide.
yeah, and then there's a surviving Geonosian again who's trying to um, raise a queen again so his people can survive. And then in the Darth Vader comic set, during the rebellion period, it's revealed there is a surviving Geonosian queen, but she's been sterilized, so she's been making droid children instead.
Yuck.
And so, of course, Darth Vader shows up, kills her, and takes all of her droid children for his own personal army to use against some of the Emperor's other flunkies. Because, of course, he fought in both battles of Geonosis during the Clone Wars, and so he knows what Geonosians can do.
So now we move on to another green alien species. I don't know if they're all green, but our most prominent participant is, and that would be the Trandoshans, a reptilian race that's first appeared in The Empire Strikes Back in the form of Bosk, the bounty hunter.
Yeah, Trandoshans are one of these unfortunately stereotyped villainous races
Mhm.
where they can show up as antagonists and they can get shot. Feel too bad when a Trandoshan dies.
Mhm.
We do learn some pretty horrifying things about their culture, but first visually, again, they're very large and strong and reptilian in nature. They have fangs, slitted eyes,
Scaly skin, large limbs, claws.
cold-blooded, strong sense of smell. So yeah, basically walking like dragon, snake, reptile people.
They're the Gorn from Star Trek.
Yes, and culturally they have a culture of strength. They have many Trandoshans are hunters or bounty hunters of some kind, um, and it's really things we learn about them quite horrifying. Where when Trandoshans are hatched, they hatch in a clutch, and the strongest member of the clutch are supposed to devour all the other ones. So the strongest surviving children can become full Trandoshans. They hunt Wookiees for fun. Um, and they often appear in antagonist roles, from a mining guild foreman who is one of the primary antagonists in a little short arc in season 4 of Rebels, to bounty hunters who are hunting Jedi Padawans who have been dumped on a hunting planet in the Clone Wars. Um, yeah, and the violence of Trandoshan culture is explored in other EU works. There's a short story where there was a Trandoshan who was raised by Wookiees who saved them from the being devoured by her own people, and so then works to reform Trandoshan society from within. And then we even get just a completely ordinary Trandoshan woman who marries a human man, as seen in a Dr. Aphra, who are um, hunters and explorers in wild space.
Gotcha.
So I think more effort has been taken to make more Trandoshans into individuals than some of these other races, because they were originally so stereotyped as just sort of like the
Hmm.
muscle.
And what like glorious look and muscle they are too. It's definitely one of my favorite looking races. Just the practical effects it takes. It's not just stuff being glued on someone's head. It's a full mask, arms, and feet, just to show off the kind of gruesome claws that they have there for, I'm sure, you know, aggressive uses in some cases. But yeah, just a visually striking race that they're doing more with, and hopefully we get to see more of.
Yeah, and look, we're able to talk more about Trandoshan, a unified culture appearance, some prominent individuals. So Trandoshans are one of the, they're a smaller species, but
Hmm.
also one of the more well realized ones. They have their problems, they have their, culture they've risen from, and they have the people who have rebelled against that culture.
Hmm.
Right. This brings us to another stereotypically villainous race, though that's been changing a little bit more as time goes on. But the Weequay.
Those were, I remember, just initially members of Jabba's barge. They were just background villains.
Yeah, so the Weequay are more common throughout the galaxy, and they leave their home planet, much like humans and Twi'leks. But the Weequay are often seen in gangs, more villainous roles, under
Hmm.
the control of the Hutts who are working for them. So physically, they have like ridges of horns around their heads and jaws. They have leathery-looking skin,
Kind of plate-like skin too,
sort of like,
segmented.
yeah, like a wiry build.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, and are often seen with blasters and in gangs. The most prominent named Weequay we see is Hondo Onaka, who is a important character in 3 arcs in Star Wars: in the Clone Wars, in Star Wars Rebels, and then Old Man Onaka is in Black Spire Outpost, where he is still a one of the characters present in the rides and attractions at Disney today.
He is one of the most infectious, just bright spots in the Star Wars series. He was he's everything that I was missing from the prequel trilogy, which is just the seedy criminal underbelly, not friends with Sith or Jedi, but just a self-serving asshat who you can't help but to love because of how clever and charming he is.
Yeah, well, you get more of middle-aged Onaka in Rebels when Connor gets through more of Rebels.
Oh
So,
yes.
so he's really the only prominent named Weequay that we get a lot of. Uh, not,
He has his crew that
yeah,
are Weequay as well, but
yeah.
yeah.
There's a couple Weequay that are in Cad Bane's crew, and but yeah, we don't have any Weequay Jedi. We don't have any. We don't know what the Weequay Senator is. We don't have a Weequay major domo to Jabba the Hutt. So it's mostly Hondo Onaka, like Jar Jar Binks, doing lifting. Had a lot of heavy lifting, but at least he's doing better than Jar Jar Binks did.
I was just picturing, uh, uh, I was just imagining Jar Jar doing physical, like actual heavy lifting, and just getting swole, and having those Darth Jar Jar rumors come to fruition.
We're going on before Connor talks more about swole Jar Jar Binks. Everyone else, please join me in casting some shame upon Connor. All right, so then we're coming up to our next alien species, primarily depicted in Star Wars Rebels, the Lasat.
I have not heard of these. I might know more once you explain, but what is a typical Lasat?
So the Lasat are based off of the initial concept artwork for Chewbacca.
Okay,
So they
yeah.
are a simian-looking race with whiskers on their chins, a purple and multicolored coloration, and then they walk sort of hunched over because they have fully articulated fingers on both their hands and feet. They're
Mm,
also very physically powerful and imposing. They're sort of in this stereotypical muscle role,
mhm.
often that Wookiees and Trandoshans, Deveronians, and others find themselves in. But most interesting for Lasat, the most prominent Lasat character we meet is Zeb from Rebels, who is a committed rebel, and as we learn, his people were a victim of genocide by the Empire. Notice a theme: the Empire loves itself some genocide. So the Lasat rebelled against the Empire and their planet using a interaction between their atmosphere and some specific electromagnetic weapons. A lot of their population was killed. We do know that there are surviving populations of Lasat, but they are many of them have been killed, and so they've been sort of scattered to the winds of the galaxy. We know that they have a strong warrior culture to the effect of if they are defeated in combat, even by a hated enemy, they must gift them their weapon. Um, and we really have one prominent Lasat character to sort of draw from, and Zeb, but and he sort of has a distaste for his own culture a little bit, in that he now lives outside of it. But we do meet some other Lasat characters in Rebels who we learn that there's a strong spiritual bent, and they have their own unique Force tradition about their ancestors and about prophecy.
And isn't there a Lasat Jedi who's uh, what's his face's master?
Yes,
Yeah.
the other next prominent most Lasat, Jaro Tapal, General Jaro Tapal at that point, who is the mentor to Cal Kestis before he is killed during Order 66.
How does his personality compare to Zeb's if we're to compare different Lasats?
Yeah, Jaro Tapal is very rigid and disciplined. Um, Zeb is very carefree, and they're both rather violent people. I don't think Lasat culture shies away from violence, but I do think it's good to see variation in the personalities, different Lasat.
Hmm.
They're both very physically powerful, but whereas Master Tapal, as he might be called, is very personally disciplined and almost rigid in his thinking. Zeb is flexible and irreverent and humorous and incredibly loyal. So that's the Lasat. And again, we meet at one point we get three Lasat characters in Ruin Rebels, and we have five different opinions.
Hmm.
So the definitely portrayed as individuals and visually distinct with the limbs being different. When we did see a live action Lasat in the third season of The Mandalorian, uh, they were entirely CGI and well animated CGI, but were entirely CGI.
Hmm. Large, massive, imposing, just as they were in animation, and well rendered.
Yeah. So that is the Lasat. Then we come on to our next species for this episode, which is one of the more prominent species in the galaxy, the Hutts.
Yes. The slugs, the godfathers of the criminal underworld. You know Jabba the Hutt. Everyone knows Jabba the Hutt. Maybe if you're not a Star Wars fan or a 2 year old, you don't know Jabba the Hutt. But
Yeah, but he is far from the only Hutt that's depicted. I mean, another prominent Hutt of Jabba's family is Zero the Hutt. We meet other Hutts in the Book of Boba Fett, and the presence of the Hutts as a sort of outer rim para-governmental force is continual throughout the Republic and New Republic period.
and they are mentally strong, physically slimy,
Also,
ethically slimy.
also physically powerful. Like
Hmm.
Jabba the Hutt is not, and sort of a lot of Hutts. Oh, we get drawn around in palanquins and all that, but there's also we see in the Poe Dameron comic and other places. There's Gracchus the Hutt, who is a swole Hutt in canon, like with arms like the size of an X-wing. No, of a proton, with arms the size of a proton torpedo, who'll just punch a Jedi in the face if he has to.
He has a striking set of abdominal muscles, which should never be seen on a Hutt, just because it's an awful juxtaposition that has haunted my dreams since I've
Well,
seen it.
I believe Gracchus Hutt he enjoys the thought of haunting everyone's dreams
Oh.
because he's super rich and he has his collection of things. So yeah, the Hutts are also individuals. Like Jabba the Hutt is sort of like this lazy but powerful crime lord. And then we have Zero, who is this flamboyant and demanding, enjoys the luxurious finer things in
Hmm.
life. We see the Hutt Council in the arc, one arc with Quinlan Voss in the Clone Wars, where they all have their own personalities, and Zero the Hutt attempts to kill a bunch of them in revenge.
This could just be my fever dream, but was there a top hat monocle hut?
Yes, there was a top hat monocle Hutt.
Oh, that's.
I don't think it was quite a top hat, but the monocle was definitely there.
Mhm.
So yeah, the Hutts are, you know, unregulated capitalist crime boss godfathers that rule large parts of the Outer Rim.
They're just a joy to have on screen, and I don't even care if you hate Zero the Hut. It's uh,
He's there to be hated.
you
Yeah,
can't dislike a giant animatronic slug that took 5 people inside to animate, even in CGI. Um, but
yeah. And so the Hutts themselves physiologically are very long lived.
mhm,
So that's one reason they have such much power in the Outer Rim, is they survive for long periods, and they're treacherous and um, have their own code, but they do have a code. They are known to be able to be partners to negotiate with, and have enough power that
mhm.
they are worth negotiating with. They control hyperspace lanes in the Outer Rim, and they do, while they have their own individuals, they act as a group with their long memories and contracts and contacts, allowing them to exert a great deal of influence in the Star Wars universe. So other than humans and perhaps maybe the Nemoidians as part of the Trade Federation, are one of the geopolitically most powerful species. There are other geopolitical organizations that are more powerful, but those are more multi-ethnic or multi-species. The Hutts sort of a Hutt supremacist view of the universe, but they also are, in their own right, very powerful.
Yeah, they're not wrong because even by the time of the Empire, you have hut space, and there's nothing that the Empire can do to quell that.
Well,
So,
they could, but they're putting their
mhm,
resources in other places.
right.
They're hoping that one thing the Death Star would do would be allow them to have a tool to intimidate the Hutts into submission.
Or so much for that.
All right.
Uh,
So then we come up to our last species of today, the Ewok.
Everyone's favorite Ewok. Before the Phantom Menace, this was the most maligned, misunderstood alien race. They are a group of diminutive teddy bears who, thanks to George Lucas's tampering, can now blink in Return of the Jedi. Thanks, George Lucas. Thank you
Well,
for spending billions of dollars to make Ewoks blink.
yes. So Ewoks, yeah, they're like 3 feet tall. They look like giant teddy bears. And they also, kill and eat sentient creatures.
Mhm.
They have they practice guerrilla warfare. They build catapults. So yeah, they're a strong and they're again another depiction of an indigenous peoples. There's an unfortunate, I think, infantilization of the Ewoks that
Mhm.
occurs. Where they worship. Look at the poor indigenous people. They're gonna worship C-3PO as a god
Mhm.
and all that. But I think as attitudes have progressed, they are then simply noted as like they're basically an uncontacted people
Mhm.
that then rapidly adapt to the situation that they find themselves in.
And
Um,
there's something that the Empire is not prepared to overcome. Uh, they're used to your more standard civilizations that they can uh, cut through political means or genocidal means. They're not used to something that is so far away from civilization, and their chicken walkers are no use against the traps of the jungle.
those would be ATSDs, Connor.
I thought they were notable chicken walker, or notably called chicken walkers in something. Maybe I'm
But
just thinking Battlefront.
yeah, by the rebels in a
Yeah,
derogatory sense.
yeah.
So, but yeah, the Ewoks themselves, probably the only prominent Ewok we really get to know too well is Wicket.
Hmm.
We don't even get his name on screen; it's just provided um, after the fact.
Hmm.
But he has a red hood, and he's the Ewok that meets with Leia.
Hmm.
Um, and we don't really see Ewoks much off of the forest moon of Endor. Uh,
I don't think they've perfected the sensitive art of space travel, hyperspace travel, anything that has to do with thrusters,
yeah, the
unless they're used to kill.
yeah the building of the second Death Star on their planet has certainly been not great for Ewoks.
Hmm.
There is a notable moment in the book Shadows of the Sith when a survivor of the Battle of Endor 20 years after the fact, still remembers how he had to kill a bunch of Ewoks to make their pelts into a coat to survive the winters while he hid from rebel patrols that were attempting to capture him, and how he got drunk on all of the Ewok liquor in their village after killing the entire village. So,
That's probably our last canonical reference to Ewoks, unfortunately.
yes, would be Steadfast, the Imperial High Colonel who becomes a First Order um, general, uh, sipping on Ewok liquor while covered in their pelts.
And you know that liquor is made from stormtrooper blood.
No, it's made from the rendered fat of their enemies. He discusses their exact brewing techniques because our antagonist here is an alcoholic. So
So stormtrooper fat.
yeah,
Okay.
basically, yeah. But yeah, Ewoks haven't really been seen outside of Endor. So they're sort of a flash in the pan race.
Much like Gungans, we have our one movie with Gungans and then just hints of a Gungan here or there afterwards.
Yeah, would I like to see more Ewoks? Sure,
Mhm.
but hopefully portrayed less as like childlike beings on this force moon, and more like, okay, now they have to grapple with the fact that they live in a galaxy with Death Stars and
Mhm.
X-wings and hyperspace travel.
And their instinct is to stab everything with a spear that
I,
it approaches.
I do not blame them. I
Yeah,
do not blame the instinct for stabbing with a spear. Look what happened when they didn't stab everyone with a spear.
that's true.
Half their moon blew up.
Well,
All right. Well, that is our review of another 11 races from the Star Wars universe. There
yeah.
are obviously many more to come in our future episodes, but please let us know if there are other races you'd like us to look at,
Anything we missed?
and any cool characters from any of these species that you'd like people to know about.
Yoda doesn't count. There's not enough information to talk about the Yoda species
Yeah,
yet.
we have 3 members, and we don't know where they live,
Mhm.
so hold off on that one.
I still think Yaddle's a Yaddle and not a Yoda, but that's just me.
That's just Connor's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for joining us today as we talked about Star Wars species, and join us next time for more Star Wars.